So essentially what it's really good at doing is bringing a wealth of diverse data sets into the one view. So you can see LiDAR, BIM models, terrain, maps, Google Reality Mesh, Vesta, any kind of spatial data can be visualized all in the one map.
This is Inspiring Design, where unique innovators come together to share their knowledge, share their insight, and keep us up to date with the latest industry trends. And here's your host, Rashan Senanayake.
Welcome back, listeners, to our continued journey on unpacking the evolution of emerging technologies. Now, before we dive into today's episode, a moment of gratitude to share that our streams and downloads across Spotify and Apple Podcasts is growing exponentially on a day-to-day. However, only 41% of our listeners are actually subscribers. It would mean the world to me and my team if you could hit that subscribe button, especially if you have at least learned a thing or two from all the amazing speakers of this podcast. We've set up a goal for reaching 50% subscribers before we level up again. Anyway, let's shift gears. Today is a different type of an episode produced live at the Locate 25 International Conference. But joining me is Amber Standley, the co-founder and CXO of Terria, a company pioneering the next generation of maps and digital twins. Similar to myself, Amber comes from a human-centered design background. Over 20 plus years of hands-on experience, she's been already innovating with augmented reality before Pokemon Go's augmented reality integration. She has an amazing background with complex problem-solving skills and delivering high-tech concepts into everyday tools through an integrated design thinking approach. In other words, Amber is here to transform sophisticated technologies like Terria's digital twin platform feel straightforward, even empowering to the non-technical end user. She's doing some amazing work. So without further ado, let's get straight into it. Welcome to Inspiring Design. Welcome.
Thank you.
We're here at a lovely conference here, all about mapping. But before we get into the nitty-gritty, I do want to understand your story and your background, because you have a really interesting one. Leading up to this, I was doing some reading about your CX design, your human-centered entire background, and that's something that I personally want to dig deep into. But in your own words, what's your background? What's your story?
Thanks, Rashan. Thanks for having me. So I guess my background has been from a designs perspective. So when I was younger, I was always very good at art. I loved the whole idea of creating something from nothing. And that kind of passion led me to study design at University of Canberra way back in 2005. So I did 4-year degree there, and I used to call myself 90%er designer. So I'd get very excited about the concepts and, creating like brand. But I always got more interested in the companies these imaginary companies that I was creating this brand for, and how to convey that through design. After that, I graduated, and I was always interested in After Effects. So I ended up at a company where I was doing broadcast design, so animation for television commercials. And from there, I went into the print industry. But I was always more interested in the problems and the ideas than the final polished version at the end. And so I found my way back to University of Canberra working in their marketing department, and that's where I decided to do a master's in digital design, and that course was amazing. They taught us how to program using processing, and we learned about generative design and coding and really cutting edge sort of technology and IoT. This was all before it became, mainstream. So from there, I I managed to, by chance, meet with a friend, Danny. He was heading up a research cluster called AR Studio. And I ended up working with them for 12 to 24 months, I think. And it was all about how can we use augmented reality to enhance student learning. So we spent days prototyping with drones and LiDAR and augmenting it and putting it in front of teachers and students to understand, how this could enhance their education. So that was a really fun time, and I got into prototyping and absolutely loved it. And when that research cluster wound up, we were constantly getting asked by industry to build augmented reality apps. So that's how I sort of accidentally founded an augmented reality agency called A Positive. And from there, we essentially built augmented reality apps for mobile and desktop to enhance tourism and museums and heritage.
Given your, I think, diverse background with design and kind of the injections of different technologies, working with different stakeholders, I can personally see where you're coming from and all the values of it coming through in Terria. But for the listeners, can you explain a little bit about what is Terria? Who is Terria?
Yeah, sure. So whenever people ask me that, I sort of start with the original problem. Terria was founded around, and it was back in 2014. The Australian government had a problem. They had all of this amazing spatial data and no way to get it to the public or industry to make it useful. So essentially what was starting to happen was they were building maps for specific data sets. So you had, this one map would only show this type of data. This map would only show this type of data for this type of problem.
Yeah.
So the original founders of Terria decided, why don't we use Cesium, which is like an open source 3D framework that essentially enables you to create 3D tiles. What they did was they were given 3 months to build a prototype, and essentially what they built was Terria.js. It's an open source framework for geospatial explorers. So essentially what it's really good at doing is bringing a wealth of diverse data sets into the one view. So you can see LiDAR, BIM models, terrain, maps, Google Reality Mesh, Cadesta, any kind of spatial data can be visualized all in the one map. And essentially that's what Terria started off with. And over the years, we've stuck true to that vision. And we've kind of summarized it now as Terria's main mission is to make geospatial data accessible and useful for all.
Yeah.
And by all, we mean everyone, like communities, schools, government, industry. And these days, it's two things. It's an open source library. So anyone who's a developer can use Terria to build maps and make their data accessible to their audience. And on top of that, we have the Terria Digital Twins platform.
Yeah.
And our big goal for that is making it easy for anyone to build their own digital twins. So that's a code-free option. And what we've done is we have our Terria data catalog, and that connects to all of the open source data in Australian government and beyond. And essentially it's like a pick and choose. You sign into Terria, you have a catalog, you can add all your foundational layers like reality meshes, base maps, and then, census data in a specific location. So, and then on top of that, you can bring your own data. So if you've got BIM models or LiDAR, or we've also got satellite imagery, and then there's a bunch of tools to help you explore and tell your story.
Yeah. Look, I think you guys have done an incredible job bringing together, I think, these complex things. There was a bunch of, I think, technical words that we got to unpack a little bit. So for the listeners that have never heard these terms before, what is a reality mesh?
So Google brought one out recently. I think it was last year. And essentially what they did was they had planes fly all over the world and capture 3D data of the environment. So you've seen like the Google Maps that have the satellite imagery. Now they've got the reality mesh, which is 3D. So you can visualize.
Part of Google Earth.
It's not part of Google. Yeah, I don't know, to be honest. So
That's right. That's right.
So what we can do is connect to the reality mesh and make it available in Terria alongside all of our other data. And what it's really good at is capturing people's imagination. So imagine you have literally a 3D model of your town. You can walk down the street like through this view and see everything in 3D now. It's really amazing. And then you could, bring IoT and suddenly you've got an interactive environment that's, based on reality, but has additional information over the top.
Yeah. I can almost imagine a future city in like 10 years time there'll be a digital version of it, and we might be able to play SimCity in real life. But one of the things I do want to understand is how as you call yourselves the next generation of mapping, right? And this word digital twins. So before we get to the mapping component, what's your definition of a digital twin?
So our definition of digital twin is based on Australian New Zealand Information Council's ANZLIC's definition. And rather than, rattling off ingredients that make up a digital twin, they have a scale. So, and it speaks to the utility of a digital twin. So right down the bottom, we have locate and visualize. That's like the very basic sort of categories that make up a digital twin. So, and, that's useful for, organizations that want to visualize, like say a project that they're building a BIM model with the terrain alongside a reality mesh to see what it will look like in the future. And then right up the top, we have automation and integration. And that's where, in addition to like those foundational layers, you can plug it into IoT. The digital twin system can feed back to reality as well. So something you change in the twin can change in the real world. And then right at the top, that's where like AR and VR sort of get integrated into the digital twin. And the kind of North Star of that is being able to simulate thousands of scenarios for a project, say, and, break it in virtual space without impacting reality. So the idea is the only cost of making all of these mistakes is the compute time. But what you get out of that is all of the learnings, and, you can avoid, big problems because you're able to simulate them before they actually happen.
And when you mean automation, that's a big word, right? How does it relate to this context?
So automation really comes down to the use case. So the user of the digital twin. So it can mean many things. Like, for example, like automation could be a property manager has multiple properties at different locations, and, they might use the digital twin for automating things that, connect to traffic sensors, and based on that they might turn the aircon up and down. Like, so the system would be smart enough to look at all of the data and make decisions. Like, that's an example of automation within parameters that the user has set. It really comes down to the use case. It could be farmers, if the temperature spikes to this crop, that's a digital twin, enact the sensors, enact the water, increase the water to this sort of thing.
Do you think it'll go as far as, everyday investors managing their properties this way?
Potentially, yeah. So, like, the technology's already there in terms of the sensors and the smarts. So it would come down to them creating their own custom workflows and, integrating them with a digital twin, say like Terria. So they would own that like workflow and they would plug it in so they could see everything all in the one visualization, and that way everyone else could as well. So it's like a single source of truth.
Yeah, brilliant. I think I can very easily understand the power of the data here, because I think everything is data in this context, isn't it? So how do you think, given your capabilities at Terria, how is this going to shift the way we work or learn even?
I think it's going to suddenly make data more accessible to the average person. So, for example, talking to councils who are dealing with, the public around, climate change problems like flooding, for example, it's very hard to convey the impact on this piece of land through technical reports and, technical maps. But if you could bring up like a simulation of, this is what happens when there's a storm surge to your piece of land and actually show them what reality looks like for them. It's a very accessible medium and it's very engaging and they get it straight away. So I think it's going to cut through a lot of the confusion and fear by just showing people this is what to expect. Yeah.
And I think the prevalent thing here that a lot of people are, I think, unsure that these types of tools coming about, there is a level of fear that people have to understand where their data goes and, the levels of privacy. And we're talking about space here, right? So if at the moment it's city scale, it's the streets, it's the farms, do you think it'll ever go down to the view of an everyday home? And if that happens, if it is a possibility, then how does that kind of play a role with privacy?
So, yeah, it's a good question. So Terria's always worked with government in the past, and so they've always worked within their framework around privacy. Like they're very strict on licensing of data sets, and also, being very careful with what data they make public and what they don't. So, there's frameworks and licensing sort of things that are already built into Terria. So in terms of like mapping your own property,
I guess if it's open source and people are doing it themselves, there is a level of accountability that shows. And is that the approach, do you think, when it comes to these types of technologies, the onus is on the user?
Yeah, so when we talk about making data sets public through Terria, we'll probably stop at government procured data sets. So, for example, local councils have public data sets that are already public that they, direct people to. They could, put it into the Terria catalog and make it public through there. And, like the onus is on them to ensure that the license is correct. But they're government, so they are quite good with that anyway. In terms of like making other types of data sets available through Terria, it's up to the data custodian what they want to make public and what they don't, as long as they've got a license for the data that they have. So, yeah, I don't think that answers the question.
No, look, for me, I think whenever it comes to every one of these emerging technologies, they're so big. They have their own complexities in itself, right? And what you're achieving through Terria is absolutely amazing, but there's a lot of key different technologies working hand in hand. So I think that's where this is a good example of one of the leading ways of using different types of mapping, different types of data, different types of technologies like AI coming to play, but it's all converging into this one part. And throwback to one of my previous episodes, the guest spoke about the great convergence coming, right? So all of these technologies working hand in hand. And I feel like you guys are living it and creating amazing value for the end user and doing some really meaningful work. So that's why I'm trying to unpack here the differences of...
I think the difference would be the data that we do make available publicly is open data, essentially.
Yeah.
So it goes by the open data framework and guidelines.
Yeah. Okay, fair enough. Well, taking a little bit of a different angle at this, one of the key skill sets is always looking at the thinking behind it. Now, obviously, when I speak to you, I can understand your designer mindset that has come through. You look at the problem from different angles. You have an abundance of experience. How important do you think to work in an industry such as yours, and even using these technologies, do you find that it's creative problem solving, critical thinking? How prevalent is that?
I think it's going to be even more important in the future as it is now, because the way AI is going, the only way for, to achieve that North Star where, you've got the agent on your shoulder helping you look at situations is to deeply understand the user and the system that they work in, because if it's not intuitive, if it doesn't work in their existing workflows, they just won't use it. So I feel like human-centered designers are in a really good spot right now, because they can essentially engage these users and do higher level work of mapping and understanding their problems, and then feeding that into like AI, essentially, to help with like the automation. So for example, at the moment we have UX and UI, and that whole industry was born because we needed to make the data accessible to non-programmers, and the UI was born essentially. So what I can see happening in the future is these UX designers and these human-centered designers will still do what they've always done in terms of engaging their audiences to understand their needs and interpret them. But then they will, rather than building, you know, a complex UI to try and make things simpler, they'll be feeding that information into like an agent, and then the user can use human language to essentially get what they need out of the tool. So for example, instead of using like tools in like Terria, you could just ask it, can you show me this piece of land with this data and tell me where's the best spot to put blah.
This reminds me of the scene of Iron Man 1, actually, where Robert Downey Jr. is actually speaking to Jarvis, his AI system, and he's doing the entire design and mapping process, but it's his critical thinking. He just got the assistant to actually work with it. That's brilliant.
Yeah, and the other thing that excites me too is like we're getting these tools that are coming out, like build.io and JDoodle, that can interpret designs and build fully functioning like tools. And you know, just the speed at which you can test and learn before you take something to the developers to, you know, to complete. It's just amazing. So, you know, it's cut like 6 months of prototyping and testing down to a month maybe, and like just how much faster you can get to creating those really stellar user experiences.
Yeah, for sure. Look, one of the key capabilities that really jumped out at me looking at Terria's features was this idea of 3D and 4D visualization. Now, we're all used to 3D, we're all used to 2D. What exactly is 4D? Like, I personally can understand it, but for someone who's never come through it, it sounds like something out of science fiction. So what's 4D and how does that work? What's 4D and how does that work with Terria?
So 4D is essentially over time. So like a really simple example is one of our early adopters wanted to, like, they're building a big skyscraper in Melbourne, and they wanted to plan that build out better over time. So they visualized their CAD model, which was like construction, like over months. So like a timeline, and then they overlaid, you know, climate forecasts, predictions around weather extremes for that year, and, you know, and then you can start doing that sort of modeling for how is this actually going to go in reality, so I can make better decisions. Oh, I can see that, you know, it's likely that there's going to be a weather event around here. Why don't we, you know, move the timeframes here and here to account for that? So yeah, essentially it's being able to visualize a digital twin over time to make better decisions. And even if it's not, you know, 100% accurate, it's still information to help you make a better decision than you would if you didn't have that information.
For sure. And I can imagine the level of, I think, responsibility and accountability now the designer has. Like, if they're now coming up with a large scale building in a major city, being able to simulate like that is absolutely brilliant. So does that mean there's all the, let's say, the weather data that we've collected over as a human civilization, they plug in, it's the city code, all of that comes into play in this one way?
Yeah, that's right. And another thing that we're doing is through our connections at CSIRO, getting the best models. So for example, climate extreme modeling. So they can do like based on previous data on bushfires, they can, you know, simulate and predict like where extremes are over like a period of time, like temperature extremes. So what we want to do is, you know, plug into that and make it available for our users as well. So suddenly, you know, little communities can plan for, you know, worst case scenario if this happens: bushfires, cyclones, floods. Yeah, so in addition to, displaying the data, we are giving people the ability to simulate and predict as well. And rather than us building those models, we're not scientists, we're not experts in that field. We just plug into the best ones that are out there and make it available.
Interesting business model. Interesting. Like, I love the fact that you're approaching this as an open source environment so that it is accessible to everyday people. Now, when you're thinking about why is this type of mapping important for the future world, in your words, in Terria's perspective, why do we need it?
We need it to build resilient communities. So the best way to engage anyone really around something is to show them. And so maps are a really accessible sort of medium that people can understand, but digital twins are even more accessible because they look exactly like reality and you can explore it from any angle and make it contextual to yourself. So, we've got like the little pedestrian you can drop in your front yard and you could visualize, okay, what's this wind farm going to look like from my house that hasn't been built yet? Or, what's all of the flood modeling? Will my house be okay if there's an extreme weather event in 5-10 years, for example? Big organizations with big budgets have access to this kind of technology, but like communities don't. So we want to make Terria a tool that anyone can use to become more resilient.
Makes sense. And I think the previous architect in me would have absolutely jumped on something like this because I think you can see the value in it. You can understand straight away the simulation power that you get from it to be able to see your design or potential idea come to life in its original context. Where do you think there's a component of charting, data visualization that you guys do, and I feel like the entire map is a data visualization exercise. How does charting play a role? And is it up to a consumer to understand these things? Because sometimes reading charts and things like that, it's almost a specialized skill set, right? It takes time to learn these things. Is that a given now for a consumer?
Yeah, so because Terria started off in CSIRO, there's like a lot of really powerful tools in there that were developed with researchers in mind. But that's something that, me and my experience design team are looking at in terms of, okay, this is a complex tool, it's very powerful. How can we make it as easy as possible for anyone to understand so they can use it? So that's where, we use usability testing, we interview users about their needs, and that's where AI could potentially come in as well as that sort of helper in terms of helping the user understand what this tool can do for them and interpret their needs and essentially get them using it and interpreting the outcomes as well. So that's a work in progress.
Yeah, for sure.
But that is our goal, is to use human-centered design to make those tools more accessible.
Yeah, and make it as simple as easily digestible as possible, I guess. Now we talked about a little bit about AI, being able to prompt, being able to speak, and that has the ability to then understand. You also mentioned augmented reality a few times. Now that can be a very complex area in itself. Do you need high-end headsets to use the mapping technology that you're talking about? Even in this conference, we can see the big players, Trimble's here, so forth. What are your thoughts?
My thoughts on that, because I was in augmented reality since 2013, and I've seen the headsets, and even when I was in Silicon Valley, people wouldn't wear them because they were embarrassed. People don't want to put things on their face, and they can be a bit polarizing as well. So while I had my A Positive company, we focused on mobile-based AR, but also developed a sort of desktop gesture recognition-based AR app. And the idea was you just walk up and participate, you just know how to interact with it. So it was like a gamified sort of product that we built. That's another story. But so essentially, everyone's got a mobile device, even communities that are out anywhere. Our goal is to make it accessible. So we will probably only focus on AR for your phone and your tablet, so they can just use their own tablet and see, say, a windmill on the hill near their house, for example. But like if we do build out those experiences, then it's easy to plug into like HoloLens as well because you've built the technology. So, if consultancies want to bring people in for this really cool simulated experience, they can do that too.
Okay, awesome. And I think that's probably a better approach because in the smartphone technologies, the tablet technologies now has the complex LiDAR technologies built in. So it's a little bit easier, I feel like, the way you're going about it, and I love that. And do you think that being able to go from the CAD environment that we're quite familiar with, that's been around for decades, how does that work? Now, what kind of files does it work? What kind of softwares are they compatible with?
Yeah, so it's pretty easy to export like a compatible file from AutoCAD. So like OBJ or FBX, like your standard. There's some really cool transformation sort of pipeline stuff happening between Unity and AutoCAD and Cesium.
Yeah.
That can make that even easier. Like ultimate goal would be you update your AutoCAD file and it updates in Terria.
Yeah.
But at the moment you can export it and it will quite easily consume it and turn it into 3D tiles and visualize it inside Terria. So it's already quite easy, but I like the idea of federated. So that way, we were talking about this earlier, that it's a different mode. So usually the designers that create these AutoCADs, they're very high quality, high detail. And of course, when you want to render that in real time in a web browser, it depreciates a bit. And we, obviously favor rendering time over pixel, pixel,
Yes.
perfection. But that's to say you don't have to choose. So you use AutoCAD for what it was built for, and then you can export a version and use it into Terria, and then you can use that version to engage the community through a share link on a web browser, tell your story in a broader context as well. So it's essentially putting your designs in reality and sharing it with the world.
Yeah, perfect. And what about the more lower end 3D modeling softwares? The things such as SketchUp, for example, or what's the other one that a lot of schools use? It's on the edge of my mind.
Yeah, I can't remember what they're called.
Blank.
Yeah.
That's okay.
As long as they can export to a format that a 3D tiler will recognize, then it should be fine. I think FBX and OBJ is pretty universal across those software.
Yeah, most 3D.
Yeah, but one thing that our team does do is service developer support packages. So it's not uncommon for us to help our partners and customers transform a complex data set so they can visualize it into Terria. So if we don't support it, get in touch because we can help you get it into Terria as well.
Yeah, perfect. And look, I think one of the things that I always like to do is understand how this actually fits in for the future workforce. Students listening in now might be thinking this is way technical. This is a lot of different experiences, complex technologies. It's almost out of my scope. But the more and more you look into these things, that you understand that that's not actually the case. You can actually do some really cool things from a school level and work your way up to those levels. Do you have advice for if a student is listening in, let's say in middle school, high school, and loves this mapping technologies and what's happening in the future world, or they want to be involved with climate change activism? What's your thoughts? What can they do right now? What's some advice for them?
There's a few things. One way of getting involved into like the mapping world and digital twins is get your hands on a drone and map a place. And then once you've got that data, what do you do next? And you don't need to study anything. Just Google it, and work out. The next phase is getting it into a software and visualizing it. And then what do you do with it? And put it in front of people, get their feedback, get their understanding. So like Terrier's free to use. We've already got, a lot of Australia's open data in our catalogue right now. So just type in Terria, map.terria.io and have a play with the data that's there and then have a go at getting some into there. The other advice I would say, no matter what you're studying, I would highly recommend learning the art of asking an open question, because it's amazing what like things people tell you that you wouldn't have gotten if you asked a closed question. So I'd recommend learning how to conduct a user interview as a lifelong skill, because no matter what field you work in, getting a deep understanding of the users or the customers or the people that you're going to be either building products or serving or creating a service is it'll just enhance everything that you do. The other one is just do a course, like a short unit in journey mapping.
Yeah.
So they're the two skills that I would recommend anyone learn because, yeah, like I said, it opens up all of these possibilities. It gives you a really solid understanding of the problem. And essentially, once you have a really good understanding of the user and the system that they work in, the solution presents itself, like it's already there. Yep.
Change in scenery. So this conference is absolutely buzzing. So we're at a better location, I feel like. But one of the things I do want to ask and learn about is your school project. Now, you guys have a very cool thing coming up. A project launch, I believe, comes through just for schools. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So in 2023, we ran the Terria Early Adopter Program, and that was all about getting people from industry and local government using Terria platform to build their first, second, or third digital twin proof of concept. And essentially that program was an amazing way for government to work with industry. And what we saw was a really cool cross collaboration and ideas sort of melding pot. And what we learnt from that program was, all of the user needs and features and functions that needed to be built in order to serve those different organizations. And so off the back of that, we were told that one of the biggest values of that was connecting them with our team because they rapidly uplift their digital twin experience and knowledge while we learn about their needs. So we're doing it again. This time, it's a 3-month program and it's called the Terria Digital Twin Partner Program. So expressions of interest are open right now, and educators in Australia and New Zealand from universities, if they're interested in learning more, they can have a look at our program page, which is on terria.io/partner program. And essentially, you just fill out a form. We get in touch, and we talk about your goals for your digital twin proof of concept and what that process looks like.
Perfect. I was going to say we will drop those links in the show notes as well. And if there are any resources, you've already mentioned that as well. Perfect.
Yeah, there's one more resource that I pulled together off the back of the last early adopter program, which is a free ebook. It's called Digital Twin 101 Guide. And essentially, I compiled all the questions we were asked during the last program and wrote a really succinct guide. And it also includes a checklist for getting started as well.
Awesome. Well, make sure to click on download those details in the show notes page. And one last question, which is a fun mystery question. And I've been kind of thinking what's a unique thing for the mapping world. But what I was going to ask you was, if you had one wish technology or feature or capability when it comes to the mapping world, what would that be?
Oh, gosh. Probably one wish, which we're working on right now, is enhancing our search functionality. So the way spatial data is structured and very reliant on people's metadata for people to be able to search for it and find it in our data catalog, for example. So I'd wish for a way that could help people improve the searchability of their spatial data before they get it into the Terria platform. And that way, more people can use it and make use of it.
Perfect. Now, look, I think there's plenty of people here, even at this conference, that might hear that wish list and work with it. So thank you so much for your time. It's really interesting to understand, I think, these technologies and how we're shaping the world that we're in these unique and interesting ways. So thank you so much for the work you're doing and sharing all this knowledge with us. keep doing what you're doing. It's very inspiring.
Don't worry, I will. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Pleasure. Thank you so much.
That's it for today's episode. Now it's time to take action and build on the learnings to get inspired. First up, jump onto rashansenanayake.com/podcast and check out the show notes, links, and other relevant learning materials from this amazing episode. Next, if you learned something new today, click that subscribe button and set yourself up to receive live notifications on future episodes, as well as more opportunities to learn from our amazing guests, brands, and speakers. Last but not least, it's time to have your say. Join the conversation and share your thoughts and feedback on today's episode with a review, all while joining many others with a 5-star rating for Inspiring Design with Rashan Senanayake. Till next time.